I'm Autumn Lockett.
And this is Mitch Randall.
And you're listening to Good Faith Weekly.
Welcome to this week's episode of Good Faith Weekly. And this week, Autumn and I are going to do a little catch-up, talk about why the president may or may not delay the presidential election in November, and then also talk about a book that I just finished, White Fragility. Later on in the podcast, we're going to interview a very, very interesting individual, Dr. Amber Schmidtke, who is a professor at the medical school at Mercer University in Georgia, also used to work at the Centers for Disease Control in Atlanta. So you'll not want to miss that interview.
Are you worried that COVID-19 is going to put off your plans for theological education? The Baptist Seminary of Kentucky is offering a full schedule online this fall. Our approach to online education is unique, offering classes live and face-to-face via Zoom. At BSK, relationship is critical, and we are thrilled to be able to offer our Master of Divinity, Pastoral Care Certificate, and Rural Ministry Certificate this way. Learn more at bsk.edu.
Autumn, how are things in your neck of the woods?
Things in my neck of the woods are actually going pretty well.
Hang on. Okay, now you can go. I didn't want to jinx this moment because, things are going well.
I'm just going to hold on.
Yeah.
So
hang on, let me check Trump's tweets. Okay, we're good. Go ahead.
Okay. We have slowly put our children back into their childcare facilities.
Wow.
With masks, and they're safe. And my house, on the first day that we took them back to where they belong, our house just went,
the entire house. And I just took a deep breath.
The whole house was like, you people have been cooped up inside of me for the past 4 months, and I need a break. Like the walls, you could just feel this frenetic energy just drain away. And in the mama, too.
Oh, well, are they enjoying their return to school?
They are so happy. Yeah, our oldest started back to volleyball, so she's getting some socialization, which at 13 really needs to go beyond your family.
Oh, sure.
She was just really done with us. And then our next oldest son is doing a creativity camp. They're all masked up. He's actually painting with a member of our church right now. Mm-hmm. And then our youngest two are at a little farm school. So they're picking tomatoes and taking care of goats and outside and filthy when they come home. And it's that little return to normalcy that I think we just really needed. And it's a calculated risk that we had to make for our family. And you'll hear that later in our conversation with Dr. Schmidtke, but it feels very good.
Good. Well, it sounds delightful. I'm glad everything is going well. And I'm glad to hear, you mentioned the kids wearing masks at school. And, you and I talked off recording before, and it seems like that's going well. Kids aren't having a problem with it. Just talk to teachers. In fact, my youngest son is a camp counselor at your son's school. And he said that, every now and again, you got to remind them to pull up their mask. But overall, they're doing a great job.
Yeah. It's just really not that big of a deal.
Yeah. It's really hard to believe that, some adults have a difficult time doing that. But, that's another topic.
How are you all doing?
We're doing well. Now, I do have to say I'm a little bit nervous because 2 weeks from now, I'm going to be getting on an airplane for the first time since March. My youngest son and I have to travel up to New Hampshire. When he was brought home when the pandemic broke, he left all of his belongings in his dorm room at Dartmouth College, and that's where they've been. They weren't letting anybody back on campus to retrieve those possessions. So we got a notification a couple of weeks ago that it was time for us to come and pick all of his stuff up. They had actually packed up the dorm room and put it into a bin. So we're going to be going to some large room where this bin resides and picking up all his stuff because he needs clothes for this next semester.
Okay.
Because he's not going back. I need to preface that. He's not going back in the fall. And so he needs a lot of those items to do online school this particular semester. He'll be going back on campus, hopefully in the winter. So I'm going to get on a plane. So I'm a little bit nervous about it. Haven't flown since March.
So I'm just picturing, that scene in Raiders of the Lost Ark where they put the Ark of the Covenant after all is said and done. It's just like boxes and boxes, and they zoom out and it's just boxes and boxes.
That's right. Yeah.
That's what I'm picturing.
Yeah. And, I'm a little bit nervous, not only for the plane trip up to New Hampshire, but when we begin to dive into that bin. I mean, this is an 18, 19-year-old freshman in college. I don't want to know what's in that bin. I don't know what's living in that bin. I don't know what organisms. I may want to take my chances with the virus, to be quite frank with you.
Sure. At least they're working on a vaccine for that.
Oh, my goodness. Well, speaking of the virus, our wonderful, illustrious president tweeted out just this morning that he thinks that it might be a good idea to delay the November election. What are your thoughts on that? Can I quote you on that?
Yeah. First of all, I think he can think that all he wants, but it's not really his position. I don't think he can legally do that, can he?
No, it's certainly unconstitutional. The only body that can set the date for the election is the United States Congress. So that is not part of the executive branch, but of the legislative branch. So he's talking nonsense. He's floating the idea out there. He's hoping that it will rally his base and blah, blah, blah. It seems like all he's been doing lately, including retweeting a few doctors that were in Washington, D.C. this week, touting his now debunked treatment for COVID-19, the malaria drug. I can never pronounce this. Autumn, help me with the pronunciation.
Hydroxychloroquine.
Yep, that's it. That's exactly it.
Okay.
And then it came to note that one of these doctors in particular had some interesting ideas about just health in general, which,
Mitch, I'm just going to say really quick that 2020 can take a lot of things away from me, but it cannot take away my sex with demons.
My gosh.
You know what? My body, my choice.
I know. I mean, I saw that. It was like, huh? Well, it has been a strange week. No doubt about that.
I feel like we say that every week.
Yeah, it does. Like you've said this before, and probably will say it 5 more times before November and January rolls around. Hopefully, we'll have a regime change and or administrative change, I should say, not regime. That harkens to third world dictatorships, but. Hopefully we'll have a change, just because these last 4 years, I don't know if we could, as a democracy, withstand another 4 years of this lunacy. But at the same time, there are a lot of serious things going on. Again, the virus seems to continue to escalate. It does seem to have plateaued. Unfortunately, it has plateaued at a very alarming rate, with numbers continuing to stay steady, but they're at a very, very high rate. And deaths are escalating as well around the country. So we need to continue to advocate for social distancing, mask wearing, take every precaution you can, hand washing. We're going to be talking to Dr. Schmidtke about that here in just a moment. I want to shift gears a little bit and talk a little bit about a book that I just finished reading that was just one of the best books I have encountered in a long time, called White Fragility. A lot of my colleagues and friends have been reading this book. It is written by Robin DiAngelo. It is an excellent book that addresses white fragility, but also white privilege, white supremacy, the way systemic racism has been an advantage to white people. But as I listened to the conclusion of the book, and the first of the book is excellent, the second part of the book is just remarkable. So don't skip the first part, but the second part is just outstanding. Really dives into this white subconscious that resists admitting to racism or systemic racism, that because this is so ingrained into the white psyche that many white people have a very difficult time understanding and coming to grips with not only racism, but with their white fragility and the dominance of race, the dominance that race plays in our society. And what D'Angelo does in the book that is extremely fascinating is she really calls out white progressives and in their inability to see systemic racism and ingrained racism within their own person. And she gives example after example of that, of especially white progressives trying to play the white savior mentality for African Americans in this country, and how they do a lot of white explaining after an African American individual has shared their thoughts on the matter. And it's really a wonderful, wonderful book. I recommend it immensely to our listeners, to our readers at Good Faith Media. It's just really, really well done. But this idea, Autumn, of a white subconscious, I've never really thought about that. That it is so ingrained into our culture, so ingrained to our persona, and into our ego as an individual, that it affects every part of our life, even when we're trying to advocate for being more inclusive and being a more diverse community, how that has really continues to even shape that conversation.
Mm-hmm. So I haven't read the book yet, but sorry, I know this is tricky because you don't want to be the white person asking the Black person, how do I fix this? But does the author give any guidance on how to sort of either sit with that, I'm a racist and move through it, or how to truly be an advocate?
Yeah, she does an excellent job of that, actually, just giving really tangible examples of how we can continue to educate ourselves and to be a lifelong learner in understanding white fragility, to understand systemic racism and overt racism, which is a little easier to understand, but especially the latter, or the former two, that we need to listen. We need to understand that the conversations that we have are important, and that we need to be willing to be criticized for our whiteness, to be criticized for our attitudes and our actions. And she talks about a few conversations that she has, because this, she speaks from a white perspective. And she talks about some of the conversations that she had about when she was perpetuating white fragility, white privilege into the conversations that she was having, and how those conversations helped her understand herself better and better herself to be not only a better advocate, but a better human being in relationship to other people who look and come from different cultures. And, for one example, she talked about a conversation of, or a suggestion of stop trying to suppress your criticism of racism when you see it and hear it, because it is a point of privilege to say, oh, I need to pull that person aside and talk to them about this in private, because the moment didn't happen in private.
Yeah.
And so, and because if you call somebody out for their ingrained racism or their white fragility in public, then they automatically start to criticize you for calling them a racist. And you're saying, that the argument is, I'm not calling you a racist, but what you did is racism or white fragility or white privilege. And let's have a conversation about that in public, because it happened in public. But because of white fragility, if you say that in public, it's like, oh, you're attacking me. You should have said that in private.
Mm-hmm.
And,
That's so good.
yeah. And it's, and there are moments like that in the book and examples like that in the book that I think are very, very telling. One story that was just heartbreaking was there's a section there called the White Women Tears. And she talks about the history of that. And this was absolutely fascinating because, years back, especially during Jim Crow, white women's tears brought about the death of so many black men. Emmett Till is the perfect example of that. Mm-hmm. The 1921 race massacre in Tulsa, another perfect example of that. That this notion of white women being the virtuous human being and the black male somehow being the averse to that plays into our psyche. So anytime a white female begins to cry in a racially diverse setting, all of the comfort and care is projected to the white woman, while the black individual, in many cases a black male, will be abandoned, and for history tells us retribution will follow for the black male. And she gives a perfect example about that happening in a classroom where she called out a white female who was attempting to white explain what a black male had just said. And she says, well, that's an example of your white privilege and the ingrained racism that you have. And this was a progressive white woman sitting in this classroom. And she began to cry. Well, then all of a sudden, her friends around her descended on her to pat her on the back, and the ear was the criticism was leveled against the teacher. And she said the picture was astounding because you had everybody, their attention on the white male who was crying, or white female who was crying, and the black male who was on the other side of the classroom was sat there by himself. Mm-hmm. And so it was, there's example after example of that in the book. But again, I just highly, highly recommend it. It is really, really good. So.
That's amazing. Something that you said earlier made me think about the racial justice town hall session that we had on Tuesday, which if you haven't seen those, they're available on our Good Faith Media Facebook page and on our website. Dr. Bridgeforth had so many one-liners, in fact, that I think we could create a Twitter account just based on her. But one thing that she said was dehumanizing dehumanizes. So, when you're sitting with your white fragility, it is an element of dehumanizing the other. And not only should you think about that because of the way that it's impacting people of color, but it's also dehumanizing you. And we all need to do better when we know better. And sometimes in order to know better, you have to pass through some time that's uncomfortable, and you have to sit with that and wrestle with it. And anyway, I just thought it just made me think about Dr. Bridgeforth's line.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely true. And that is reiterated time and time again in White Fragility, that, the point of white privilege is that we always want to be comfortable. We want to be safe. We want to feel like, we're not being attacked. But the reality is maybe we need to be attacked. We need to be uncomfortable. And I think a lot of times the individuals who are struggling with this, who have questions about this, who give us the most pushback when we talk about the importance of diversity and inclusion, but also the evils of white privilege and white supremacy in this world and systemic racism. The ones who push back on that the most, I think, are the ones that are really internally struggling, because they're doing so from a position of safety, of privilege, of power. They do not want to feel uncomfortable, but they need to. They absolutely need to. And if the one thing that we learned from the scriptures, and especially the Gospels, is Jesus was a master of making everybody uncomfortable. He would tell stories. He would ask questions, and everybody would go, "Oh, yeah, I'm not doing that," or right. that convicts me. And we need to be convicted, especially the white dominant culture in America. We need to be made to feel uncomfortable and implement societal transformation. Well, speaking of societal transformation, you're going to want to stay tuned and listen to this interview. Autumn and I had the privilege of visiting with Dr. Amber Schmidtke earlier this week, who is a medical professor at Mercer University out in Macon, Georgia. As also, she's a former employee of the Centers for Disease Control. Lots of great information that you want to stay tuned for. Ethics Daily and Nurturing Faith are coming together and joining forces to launch Good Faith Media. Is that not exciting?
I am pumped. I'm so excited. We've been planning this and scheming and dreaming, and it's finally coming to fruition.
Well, we're really excited to roll out the new website, hoping that everybody will get a chance to log on to goodfaithmedia.org starting July the 1st. But there's also something we want to invite a lot of our good friends to be a part of, and that is the Good Faith 50. So, Autumn, tell us a little bit about the Good Faith 50.
The Good Faith 50 is a group of our friends who want to support us. And our goal is to grow our monthly members, so our folks who donate to the mission of Good Faith Media, which is to provide resources and reflection at the intersection of faith and culture through an inclusive Christian lens. We want to invite the people who believe in that mission to become monthly donors. And our goal in July and August is to grow our monthly donors by 50.
That is absolutely awesome. We welcome anybody who wants to be a part of the Good Faith crew in the months of July and August. And all they need to do is go to goodfaithmedia.org, hit the donate button, and then select to become part of the Good Faith 50 and a monthly donor at any level. And we would love to hear from you. And we appreciate, as always, your support. Your contribution helps us publish new articles each and every day. It also helps us produce short documentaries and allows us to cover stories across the country. It helps us publish more books and provide more experiences for more people of faith. We are trying to advance a faith that is inclusive for all, providing justice for all and freedom for all. So make certain you sign up on Good Faith 50 at goodfaithmedia.org. Welcome back to Good Faith Weekly, and this week's guest is Dr. Amber Schmidtke. Welcome to the pod, Dr. Schmidtke. Dr. Schmidtke teaches microbiology at Mercer University School of Medicine. In addition to her teaching duties, she currently volunteers on the Georgia COVID-19 Data State Task Force. She's also worked previously at the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, and we are absolutely thrilled and excited to have somebody of your stature on the pod today. So, Dr. Schmidtke, welcome to Good Faith Weekly.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, we're so thankful. Now, I have to tell you, first of all, that I have a lot of friends on Facebook that probably have more medical knowledge than you do. They did go to high school, and they do sell detox tea to supplement their income. So I'm going to be basing all of my scientific knowledge on their posts.
Awesome.
The true experts of the world. Yeah, exactly.
Obviously, we are kidding. We are so thankful to have some additional light shed on this. And so we're excited about our conversation.
Definitely. We all are trying to learn science as we go here. So this is a great opportunity.
Good.
Yeah, I saw someone mention that for some folks, this is the first time they've seen science in action, that there's a lot of trial and error. These things that we all rely on, like the flu shot, like polio vaccines, had a life that looks a lot like COVID-19. Many of us just weren't around when that was happening.
Right. I mean, a lot of science and the scientific method is something that happens without a lot of public scrutiny. There are a lot of opportunities for correction and, peer review and double checking each other that normally doesn't have this public spotlight shining on it. And so in some ways, I think some people think that this means that science doesn't agree. And so therefore we don't need to do what science is saying. But honestly, this is one of the most beautiful parts of science, in my opinion, is the collaborative nature of it and the self-correcting nature of it. I think that if a lot of us in other industries could take on that humility and recognition that we don't necessarily know all the answers and be willing to change our mind in the face of evidence, then I think that would help us in a lot of areas.
Now, Dr. Schmidtke, cases in Georgia are on the rise, almost 3,000 new cases as of today. I noticed in the recent reporting, 11 deaths were reported today. We just really want to begin by asking, before we get into all the technicalities of addressing this pandemic and the safety measures that we can take. We've been asking all of our guests, how are you? How's your family? What are you doing as a mom, as a parent, to take care of yourself and take care of your family?
Wow, what a great question. And honestly, not one that I get asked all that much. You'd be surprised. I think that, it's been a struggle. I think my kids are probably getting more screen time than they ever should. Because, I've been having to work from home. I've been having to be a mom at the same time. And I know a lot of parents are going through that too. We do try to make sure that we're getting exercise every day and we see the sun for a good while, even though it's hot in Georgia and unpleasant. We're going camping this week. We're going to socially distance and hopefully not see another soul. But it will be a great opportunity to get out of this house and to, reconnect with nature and stuff like that. So thank you for asking.
You bet. Now, if you go out in the woods and you see all the deer and the raccoons and the possums wearing masks, they get, they understand this better than we do.
I will say there was a little bit of, anxiety about where we were going camping. I had to research to make sure it wasn't a hot zone right now, or seeing a lot of increase in disease. My poor husband, being married to me, this is just part of the joys of, planning a vacation in a pandemic.
Yeah.
Well, that'd be nice to get away.
I think but I have a friend whose husband works in kind of the public health arena, and it's really impacted which church they could go to because he's really averse to intinction, communion. And so even though theologically that's really where they land, they don't go to that kind of church. This was pre-COVID. This is like years ago. Sure. It's like part of their marriage counseling.
Oh, wow.
That's hilarious.
I know. So you mentioned, screen time and exercise and sunshine. But you also talked about this whole scientific process being, having some mistakes in it along the way that you're going to have, give and take. And we've seen that really around the topic of masks, because in the beginning of this thing, it was like, maybe it's airborne, maybe masks help. It has to be this kind of mask. Now masks don't work. Now they do, and you need to be wearing them. So first of all, how is your family handling masking? And second of all, what words of advice do you have for us now?
Definitely. And those are all solid, assessments of the situation as it has, moved over time. I think that initially we were advising the typical person against masks just because we needed to prioritize that personal protective equipment for our healthcare workers. And we knew there was a shortage. So I think that may have been misinterpreted as the message went out that, we didn't need to take precautions. We do, but we definitely need to prioritize saving those for the ones that need it. However, we, as time has gone on, we've learned more about masks and how they can help. And I think, no, they are not an invincibility cloak or anything like that that's going to save us from all threats, but it's better than nothing. And so I think that it's important to encourage that mask wear whenever we can. For my family, we wear masks anytime we are going into public outside of the house. I mean, like if we're going around the neighborhood and walking the dog, of course, we're not wearing a mask, but I'm the only one that goes to the grocery store and I'm wearing a mask every time. There was a time that we had to go into a hardware store because we were out of furnace filters or something, and the boys were wearing their masks too. And my boys are very not excited about wearing the masks, but we've made it work. And so they've learned that they just have to do it in order to get the things they want done outside of the house. So.
Now, Dr. Schmidtke, is there one particular mask that you would recommend over another? I mean, I know that we've in my family have, purchased just the typical blue surgical mask, but then also we've been able to find some of the N95 mask as well. Is there a certain kind of mask that you would recommend over another?
So the N95 masks are the best ones for preventing those airborne particles from reaching you. We were worried about the supply of those in the early days. It sounds like we probably have more now. One of the big important things with an N95 mask is making sure that it fits correctly against your face, because if there are any gaps, then you sort of lose the benefit of having it. But there are certain career fields where that would be more important, like those that are having frequent and prolonged contact with the public, like grocery store workers potentially, or, healthcare workers. They probably need to be wearing those masks for sure.
Yeah. In addition to mask wearing, especially initially, there were a lot of suggestions on how to keep you and your family safe, frequently washing your hands. I can't tell you how many times I sang happy birthday to myself in the mirror. Social distancing, obviously, avoid indoor gatherings of, there was always, the number seemed to fluctuate, but avoid those indoor gatherings, avoid large gatherings altogether, stay at home unless, you're getting out for exercise or essential belongings such as food, grocery shopping, like you were talking about. Have those changed over time? Is there something that's more dangerous than the other? What could you advise to our listeners? I mean, what is the CDC? What are health professionals saying? These are the essentials to help just flatten this curve and to make certain you're as safe as possible?
So initially we were nervous that there was going to be fomite transmission, meaning inanimate surfaces like doorknobs and elevator buttons and those sorts of things that, a sick individual touches that, you touch it and then touch your face and you give yourself the virus. It doesn't seem that is a primary route of infection like we had worried about at first. And that's a good thing. We should be grateful for this. But there is still some concern that we know that it's respiratory droplets, but there is some possibilities of airborne transmission too. There have been some limited studies that have shown that. And so I think the jury is still out on that particular route of infection. But I think that it's important to just keep in mind, I keep three things in mind: time, distance, and shielding. And so you want to try to reduce the amount of time that you're around somebody that you don't live with in close proximity. You want to increase your distance from that person, and that's the recommendation for 6 feet, for example. It's about twice the length of a person's cough and how far those droplets are going to land. And so that's the recommendation for that. And then shielding, I just mean like putting something between you and a hazard. So that could be like a mask. It could be plexiglass, like you see some of the cashiers at the grocery store using. That's a great strategy, just to keep those respiratory droplets from spreading too far. So I use that when I'm considering my risk in a task.
Yeah. Excellent advice. Excellent advice.
Yeah, it really is. So you mentioned earlier homeschooling your children. Is that something that Georgia is mandating right now, or is that a personal choice?
No, that is a personal choice. And I will say that I have never homeschooled my children, and I am not necessarily looking forward to it. I am great at teaching adults. I am less great at teaching middle schoolers and elementary kids. So I think I probably misspoke when I said homeschool. We're going to be doing the virtual learning option through our school district, but I know that requires a lot of parental support. And so I know that there are parents that I just want to make sure I say that there are no bad parents in this situation. Sure. I know that parents are having to make the best of an impossible situation for them. And so, for us, it made sense for me to either take this year off entirely or work in a remote capacity to be able to support my kids through that learning and keep them safe.
See.
Dr. Schmidtke, I mean, you bring up such an excellent point because, in this debate of restarting school, starting in August, I think nobody is attempting to just say there is the perfect answer to restarting schools. And there's so many nuances that are at play in addressing this particular issue. The CDC has come out with guidelines. My fear is that there's going to be a rush to open schools, and then we're going to see the spread of COVID-19 even further. One of the big proponents for people who advocate for reopening schools really without any limitations is that children have been averse to contracting this disease more so than older adults. We are now discovering that that may not be the case. Is there any, can you speak to that potential misnomer that children can't contract COVID-19? And if they do, what kind of long-term effects would a disease like COVID-19 have on children?
Oh my goodness, there's so much to that question. So bear with me for a minute.
Sure.
So I think one of the central things is the idea that children can't get the disease. And unfortunately, I don't think that's true. I think we have benefited from the fact that almost every school in the country shut down right away. And so there just hasn't been opportunity for the disease to reach kids. We haven't had mass gatherings of kids. There was a study that came out just recently out of Israel. They reopened schools. I believe it was in May, fully reopened, no social distancing, no mask requirement. And within 10 days, they had an outbreak in their school. And this was a middle school and high school joint sort of school together in the same building. And so they saw as many as, I think it was 16% of the staff were infected. There was a good mix of students that were infected, but especially in the grades of 7th through 9th. And so what I'm saying is that we're starting to see examples in a study like that, but we've also had summer camps here in the United States that reopened and did see transmission among the campers. So it can happen. It just hasn't had the chance like we've had for adults where mass gatherings are taking place in the workplace or elsewhere. Now, as far as the long-term impacts, that's a great question because honestly, we're very new in this pandemic still, and we don't know all of the things that this thing is doing. We do know that the recovery time is longer than you see for influenza. When we follow up with patients 14 to 21 days out, another study shows that they still have at least one symptom, and they report having a decreased quality of life compared to when they were before COVID. And so this is more serious than the flu. In terms of recovery. And part of the reason for that is because we all think of COVID as a respiratory illness, and that's certainly how it gets into the body. But once it's there, it actually is a vascular disease because of where it goes in the body. And so it can trigger blood clotting, and that can trigger things like strokes and heart attacks and other things that, if you have that, obviously that can have a long-term impact. And the recovery time for that is going to be significant. So I think we still don't know, and we especially don't have good enough data in kids to know what the long-term impacts are going to be.
So what you're saying is there's studies going on right now released by Israel, as you said a moment ago, but there is potential for an outbreak, God forbid, but there is potential for an outbreak among children because we have not experienced the enormity of what it means to restart education in this country, because I don't think people realize how many students are going to be crammed into these school systems at one time. And not only the children, but you got teachers, you got, adults there. I was talking to my brother.
People those children live with.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, and a lot of those people are in our vulnerable category. I mean, think about the average age of a school bus driver. Mm-hmm. A lot of them this is their second career, something to keep them busy. And, they would be high risk potentially due to age or underlying conditions. But there's lots of people affiliated with the school. And we also know that the school provides more than just an education. So there's a hard balance that has to be struck here. I'm just concerned that we have, especially in the South, especially in Georgia, we have such high rates of transmission among our communities that, and we're starting to see the strain in our hospital capacity and things like that we're really already at a point where we can't handle any more transmission than we're already seeing, because it might tip us over into that threshold of not having the ability to care for the ill. And so I can't imagine reopening a school right now and introducing that opportunity for the virus to spread more widely.
Mm-hmm.
And Dr. Schmidtke, it's such an important point that you're making, but there's also a larger issue at stake. We've been suffering from this pandemic now, just here in the United States, for 4 to 5 months now, since late February. Some speculation that the virus actually came in before that, but regardless, since the beginning of the year. The response early on, let's just say, was not extraordinary. And we suffered the consequences of that. As the disease continued to spread, as the numbers continued to increase, infections, death, it became very paramount that this was a serious situation, that no matter what you said, no matter what side of the political aisle you were on, no matter your profession, no matter how large your checkbook, what religion you were, this disease just didn't really care. It just continued to spread. So this is a long way to get to this question. Because we botched the first reaction to the disease, we weren't able to contain it as a nation. My concern is that we've got a second shot here. And going into the fall, if we do not take the proper precautions and institute the proper response to this disease, that we are going to look at even increased numbers, both in contractions of COVID as well as the death rate, increasing dramatically going into the flu season. We've got one shot here. What should we be doing that we're not doing to shut this thing down?
Oh, goodness. So sorry, I have a lot of thoughts on this, but if I had a magic wand, it would not be popular, but we need to close down. We need to probably do a shelter in place at a national level for probably 4 months, or not 4 months, 4 weeks, 4 to 6 weeks, to get transmission down to a level that we can properly track and monitor it. And we can have the hospital capacity to deal with the infections that do come. And then when we do reopen, we need to do it strategically. In the South, there was a big effort to just sort of return to life as usual. Mm-hmm. And that has had bad consequences for us. I mean, we're seeing our cases and deaths, cases are surging, hospitals are surging, our hospitalizations, and now deaths are starting to increase. So I think you're right. We do need to take advantage of this opportunity while we still can, before the influenza season starts up, before people are more likely to be indoors with each other. Because remember that a person can have more than one infection at a time. So a person could have COVID-19 and influenza at the same time. They look very similar, and that's going to make things very complicated for healthcare workers to distinguish who has what. So this needs to be the very best year we've ever had for the influenza vaccine. We need really good compliance with that flu shot. As much as we can get people to do that, that will help a lot. But the other thing to remember is that all sorts of respiratory infections are going to make you cough, whether it's the common cold, influenza, RSV, or whatever it might be. When you're coughing, you're expelling all of your respiratory droplets, regardless of what they might be carrying, and it could be COVID, among other things. So that's you're right. The idea of entering into the fall, entering into the winter, it is alarming and concerning. I do think we still have a chance to get this thing under control, but we need to make those decisions and get going on them now.
What I hear you saying is that this isn't like one of those Marvel movies where the bad guys wait until one bad guy's finished fighting and then another bad guy jumps in. They're all going to team us out at once.
Well, I mean, yeah, that's the thing. I mean, viruses don't care. They don't take turns. Exactly. And a virus honestly doesn't care whether we're tired of being around it. I know that Mitch mentioned that, we've been in this pandemic for 4 to 6 months. We're tired of it. We're all tired of it, but the virus doesn't care. In fact, it wants us to get tired of it. It wants us to go back to life as usual so that we congregate in groups and it has another opportunity to infect the next person. So I wish that it cared what we thought, but it just doesn't.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So Dr. Schmidtke, for us to get our minds around it, okay, say we continue down this track of reopening, making, small attempts at trying to protect ourselves. Wink, wink, we're wearing masks, wink, wink, we're social distancing, but we're really not. What kind of numbers are we really looking at? I mean, we're talking double, triple the infections, death rates. I mean, because I think that while these numbers have been significant over the last 2 months as they have escalated, especially in the South, as you mentioned, I still don't think we understand what something like this could do and do quickly, the impact it could have on our society at large. I mean, a lot of people argue that we need to reopen because of the economy. Well, if we're tripling these numbers in, a month or two, the economy is gone because nobody can do anything for a lengthy amount of a time. And businesses will begin to shut down. Organizations will begin to close. And the economy will suffer even a greater setback if we do not put these measures into play. So, I mean, if we just kind of continue down this road of just kind of curtsying to this disease, I mean, we have potential for we're in crisis now, but just a calamity that this country has never, ever seen before.
Right. So I was doing some numbers or looking at some numbers today, looking at the case rate of our country compared to some others. And even like a country like India or China, which has a lot bigger population density than we do, and you would think more opportunity for the disease to spread, our rate of infection is 12 times as high as theirs when you adjust for population. And our death rate is like 80 times as high. So it's really big. So what I'm saying is, we're all experiencing this pandemic together, right? So yes, our economy is important, but the economies of all these other countries are important too. And they have figured out a way to knock down their level of transmission and they're able to reopen in a cautious and strategic way, of course. But I think that they are closer to the other side of this pandemic than we are. And so I agree. I know that we need to look after our economy, but you're absolutely right. If we don't have people at the end of this thing, then who's going to spend the money and who's going to buy the next house and that sort of thing. As far as where we could be headed, it's hard to say. There are far smarter people than me out there who do projections and modeling. I look at it, but it's not my strength here. But what I will say is that, if we use the 1918 pandemic of influenza as sort of a guide, it's a similar disease in the sense that it's respiratory. COVID-19 isn't quite as transmissible as that disease was, and it doesn't seem to impact people in the prime of life the way that the 1918 influenza did. But what happened there was that there was an initial wave of infection and death that looked big at the time, but they were able to knock it down through a lot of the same measures that we're doing now: social distancing and closing schools and banning large gatherings. And then it went away for a little while, but then it came back, and the second wave was enormous. And we're talking probably, I don't want to quantify it, but it was a big number of deaths. Mm-hmm. And we don't want to see that happen in this country, potentially. That I think that would be devastating, honestly. Right. What I worry about is, from an economic standpoint, you mentioned the schools earlier. If we open the schools and we see outbreaks, and heaven forbid we see deaths among children, I don't know that a parent is going to have an easy time trusting that school with their kid again. Even after the disease is gone or diminished within a community. I think that it's only going to inspire more caution, more fear. And I just don't think that that's good for kids. It's not good for parents. And I worry about the psychological impact on these kids too. If their teacher doesn't show up because they tested positive for COVID-19 and they've heard about COVID-19 and its impacts, are they terrified that their teacher is in the hospital? Are they worried about their fellow classmates? Right. And I don't think that enough is being discussed to consider the mental health impacts that we're going to be seeing among teachers, staff, and kids in this situation.
Yeah. Well, I'm terrified that we're going to see this thing escalate quickly going into the fall. And I hope cooler heads prevail. I hope wisdom prevails. And, if I had a say in this, I'm right there with you. I think we need to shut down 4 weeks. It would be difficult. It would be tough. But long term, it's the most successful way to address the spreading of this pandemic. And so I don't know if that's going to happen. I don't have a whole lot of hope that that's going to happen, but I certainly wish it was. So we're about running out of time, but I do got a couple of questions. I know Autumn's going to be able to feed these questions to you quicker than I am. But she mentioned, all of the Facebook and Twitter experts out there, who, read somewhere on some post that this was a big hoax and, blah, 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 blah.
They found one anecdote that matched what they wanted to be true. And so
Right.
they're blasting it like it's been checked by peers.
Right. And so, I mean, like when, I was reading something the other day and they were talking about that this is a plandemic, that scientists are escalating the numbers and that the infection rates are not as high as they truly are, and the death rates aren't as truly as that. In one instance, somebody died in an automobile, and then they were categorized as a COVID death. How do you respond to people like that? How do you get through to people like that, and not in a nasty, ugly way, even though that's exactly what I want to do, but to take them by the face and parent them and say, "Look at my eyes. This is serious."
Yeah, it's so hard. And honestly, I do have a social media following. I talk a lot about the data. I produce a newsletter that's available just about daily. And that has been a source of information for a lot of people. But what I will say is, like, when you teach your kids to ride a bike and they are taught to wear a helmet, I don't know if this happens with your kids, but with mine, when they see somebody not wearing a helmet, they think it's their job now to police them and say, "Oh, so-and-so's not wearing a helmet." And they'll say it right to their face. And it can be kind of embarrassing, but at the same time, you're kind of proud of them, right? Because they've recognized the safety risk of what they've done. And so I'm still having that with my kids now with masks. So they are admonishing strangers on the street for not wearing their masks, which is great. Problematic because there's such polarization over mask wear. Right. But what I will say is, let's see, we were talking about, I got off topic.
Yeah, just trying to respond, in a constructive way to these people who are not taking this seriously or calling it a pandemic and just coming up with these conspiracy theories of why this isn't as serious as it really is.
Definitely. Okay. So first of all, public health has been the subject of conspiracy theory from the very beginning. When we started doing vaccinations, people thought we were giving people smallpox when we were immunizing them for cowpox. This was well before me. I wasn't there, obviously. But
still there.
And so in many ways, public health is this thankless job, right? That
Sure.
We've been working on the community's behalf and there's not a lot of love for it and especially not when something goes wrong like it is right now. But what I will say is that, we have metrics that, with the example you gave of like an automobile accident while a person happened to be positive for COVID. No, that's not typically coded as a COVID death. There's guidance from the CDC that directs how those deaths are supposed to be recorded. But what we can do is look at the total deaths that have happened this year, for example, in 2020, and compare that to the trends over the last 5 years or so. And we see that there are a whole lot more deaths this year than there were last year. We haven't had a big hurricane, earthquake, or some other natural disaster to account for those deaths. So the only thing that really has changed is the arrival of COVID-19. And so, it's the sort of thing that, okay, you don't like this piece of data, I can show you this one. And so for me as a data scientist, that's where I tend to go most is I'll show you the data. Mm-hmm. It doesn't always get through, but I'm also not everybody's mother, going back to what I tell my kids about helmets and masks. I'm not their mom. I can't make them do it. And so I also am not everybody's parent when it comes to COVID-19. I can't tell them what to do. I can't force them to wear a mask. I just try to show the data as much as I can so that they can make their own conclusions about what the data are actually showing them.
Yeah. What is your newsletter? Or social media presence, whatever that is.
So I have a couple. So I'm on Twitter as Amber Schmidtke, PhD. I'm also, the newsletter is amberschmidtkephd.substack.com. And that is, it's an email list that you can subscribe to and it goes directly to your inbox. But the other thing is I've got a podcast that just launched last week called Public Health for the People. And that's kind of, taking advantage of this opportunity where all eyes are on the data right now. And it's an opportunity to bring people into science and improve their comfort and literacy of scientific information so that, we don't waste this opportunity when everybody is suddenly concerned with it, to not educate them so that they will be ready for the next scientific challenge that we face.
We'll have links to all of that in our show notes and on our social media as well.
Excellent.
Okay, cool.
Dr. Amber Schmidtke. Oh, you can go ahead. No,
I was just going to say I can email it to you too so that you have.
Oh, that'd be great.
Because my last name's hard to spell. I know. Sorry, Mitch.
No, you're fine. Dr. Amber Schmidtke, thank you so much for joining us at Good Faith Weekly this week. Lots of great information. Thank you so much for your wisdom. And also thank you for your service to just public health in general. I know sometimes it can feel like a thankless job, but we've got plenty of listeners and readers at Good Faith Media that owe you a standing ovation, you and your colleagues. So thank you, thank you, thank you. Each and every week, we have one final question, and Autumn always has the pleasure of asking it. So, Autumn, I'm going to let you take it away.
Perfect. So at Good Faith Media, our motto is there's more to tell. So in light of everything we've discussed, and with schools kind of glooming on the horizon, what is your more to tell?
Oh, goodness. Just understand that, this is it's a challenge, right? This is historic, what we're going through right now. And if you're having a hard time with it, you're not alone in that. But what we've seen through all sorts of experiences like this in the United States, whether it was 9/11 or other things, is that moments of incredible challenge also inspire incredible moments of courage and bravery and compassion. And I think that the more that we can remember where we are in time and our role in this time will inspire us to do the right thing we can for our neighbors, for our communities, and get us to the other side of this pandemic. So I guess that's I
like that. That's fantastic. Thank you so much. Again, Dr. Schmidtke, thank you so much for being with us on Good Faith Weekly. We wish you the very best of luck out in the woods this week, wherever you may be going. Hope you get some time away with your family and get some rest and relaxation. You deserve it.
Thank you, guys. I appreciate being with you.
Well, that wraps up another episode of Good Faith Weekly. And as always, Autumn and I want to wish everybody good faith and hope that you are staying healthy and safe in this world.